You are here in our second keynote presentation for the 42nd Annual Seed Savers Conference, and I am excited to have you all here. My name is Janine Shepard. I'm the Education and Engagement Manager here at Seed Savers Exchange, and we are here with Stephen Silverbear McComber. We're really excited that Stephen said he would join us. He has been connected to Seed Savers Exchange since the early 1980s, and he is actually connected to many of the indigenous seeds we have in our care here. Stephen is going to talk about planting by the moon, along with sharing some of his indigenous knowledge and talk about his seeds and share some Steve's garden tips. So Stephen, thank you so much for being here. I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, good. Okay, is it all set? I'm not good at these things. All right.
Yeah, you're on. You look great.
Yeah. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. What kunarad za hagwego? Wagatsuni za katu ne nuani winisaradi siyan jatarorge, which means welcome everybody. I'm happy to be here in the circle with you here this afternoon. This is in the Mohawk language that I began with, and it's always been customary when I do some of my Zooms or if I'm speaking live. I usually just well, sometimes I do Elvis, but most of the time I do a traditional chant. It's a good way to kind of loosen up and feel comfortable and so on, and that's the way I am. So I'm going to share to you a little chant, and this is called Oride, okay, which means it's a pigeon, and the pigeon, like the other birds, are responsible for when they carry seeds. That's what it says in our language. And so I have sunflowers and different seeds growing all over the place, and it was their job to do that. So I just want to share this one song, and in our culture, it's one of the first songs that we use in the springtime. And a long time ago, when there was passenger pigeons, something that you would have to look up in history, that actually was a source of protein after a long winter. And so this is called, and it's not the same pigeon that you see in the park. Those ones they're kind of notorious for other reasons. So we'll get going. You are you are muchas gracias. So my name is Silverbear, or Unos Layuntos. In my language, it means corn planter. This is a name that I adopted maybe about 30 years ago. All the Haudenosaunee people or the Iroquois people that we're known by, or the people of the Six Nations, who are traditional homelands, are all central New York State, right up into the Ohio Valley, southwestern Quebec, right up to the city of Montreal, and southwestern Ontario, around Brantford, Ontario, and in that region. This is all the traditional homelands of our people. And in there, we are Six Nations of people. We are Mohawks, who are in the east. Then there are the Oneidas, the Onondagas, the Cayugas, the Senecas, and then the Tuscaroras. So we are the people of the Six Nations. So that's how we identify ourselves about. Our languages are very similar, but they're different dialects. But our traditions and our stories is all the same. And so what I want to talk about at the moment is about, in our language, we call it Jonheko or Jonhekoa, which means the things that support our life. And it's the same as the people in Mexico call it milpa. So the things that they grow all together. So among the Haudenosaunee people or Iroquois people, well, you all hear about the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. But in according to our tradition, it's not only those three. We also grow traditional tobacco. We also grow sunflowers. We grow potatoes, and we cultivate strawberries. So all of these together make up what is part of our milpa. And we have ceremonies around the year, throughout the whole cycle of the calendar cycle of our people. So just hold on a moment. So I'm going to show you a traditional Haudenosaunee moon calendar. So this is a traditional moon calendar right here. Okay, this is a snapping turtle. All right, this is is turned into a traditional instrument that we use in all of our ceremonies in the longhouse. And it's used to sing the most sacred song of our people, which we call Ostoa, meaning a great feather. This is in honor of our creator, of the Great Spirit. And so all our ceremonies, this is a song that is used in there. But for the purposes of learning something and sharing, now we call it turtle teaching, which we never did before. I guess it's all new. And so, as you see, there are 13 moons in a lunar year, and on the turtle here there are 13 plates representing all the 13 moons, and along the edge there are 28 plates right here. There's 28 of them that goes around. So the moon, each moon is made up of four parts, meaning four. So it begins with a new moon, and then it goes to the half moon, or what I like to call, which I learned not long ago, waxing. So like wax on with Mr. Miyagi. Ha! So right there. So there's a wax on, then there's a full moon, and then there's the dark side of the moon, not with the one with Pink Floyd, but the dark side of the moon. And this is a time when we don't plant. It's a time to prepare the soil, pull weeds, hoe, and different things. So those are the four parts, and each part is made up of 7 days. So you take 7 days times 4 will give you 28. So it gives you exactly a perfect a lunar year. And so 28 times 13 will give you 364 days exactly, a perfect year. Even though I know the Julian calendar has 365 days, but every 4 years they have to what they call leap year. So and the Aztecs had the same thing. The Aztecs in their calendar, they had a day that they call a hollow day. So it's a day, a physical day that did happen, but at the same time, the people just like laid quiet. So this is how they calculate it. So in our creation story, it's a story of a woman that fell from the sky world, and this sky world is a star system. So because we still refer to it all the time in our ceremonies, and it's called Onaguadala. I think in English you call it Pleiades. So in our creation story, it says the woman fell from the stars and was placed on the back of a giant turtle, and then the land grew. And so as they went along, at the same time, this woman that ascended from the sky was pregnant with a child, which happened to be a girl child when the child was born. And so the original sky woman was on the back of her turtle, and then she started walking on the turtle, and she walked in the direction that all things grow. So even today in our ceremonies, in our longhouses, and all our dances, we follow the same pattern from east to west or counterclockwise. And this is what we still do. And if you look at beans that will grow up a pole or up a cornstalk, this is the direction that they'll grow. They'll grow counterclockwise like this, and to ascend up the stalk. And so everything that we do follows the same pattern. And So in our creation story, it talks about that at a time, the daughter was visited by a spirit, and they say because there was only known to her and her mother, just those two, that she had fainted, and there was the spirit placed two arrows on her body, and they said that one was a straight arrow and one was a crooked arrow, and so when she gave birth, she had given birth to twins, and there was two boys, and one, the straight arrow, he came into the world like all children do, but the crooked arrow came out on the mother's side, and she died. And so they said they placed her body in the ground, and so in the ground grew the sacred food crops of our people, according to our stories and our tradition. It said first that the beans. So if you look here, I have a bean, one bean. Satkato is a bean. That's a skunk bean, by the way. So it looks like your fingers, the same thing, joints. So it said that the beans grew from her fingers or from her hands. So then the next, it said that the squash in our language is called Jonaritsageto, which means from the umbilical. And I will just show you quickly. I have this. I have some of my own props here. So this is a blue Hubbard that just dried up in my garden a couple of years ago. So I still use it. And here's the umbilical right here. You see? And so that's what it says in our language. So and it's called that. So and all living things are hooked up to the umbilical of their mother. And so when you look in the garden, you'll see pumpkins and you'll see squash. And they're all grown by an umbilical cord. So that's the second sister. So the third sister is honeste, corn, which is a sacred food crop of many of the indigenous people throughout the Americas, in North America, Central America, South America. And this corn here that I'm going to show to you in our language is called Dini Nuguego, which means your nose is blocked. So because it refers to the end of the corn. So, and this is it has a higher starch content, and it's excellent in for making cornbread. And so this one was favored before for making cornbread. So it says that the corn, it grew from the breast of our mother, the earth. And so when you looked at that, all living things feed from the breast of their mother. And then there's milk. And so if you take corn in September or late August, you will see that it's all full of milk. And as it begins to dry, it hardens up, and then we store this. So in our ways, we take our corn and then we braid it into a long chain and then we hang it up. And you might be able to see one in the back of me. This is a small braid of corn. And this is how it's preserved amongst the Haudenosaunee people. I don't know about other Indians because I don't really no, I don't always go to some of their communities. I go often to Mexico, and they do similar things, but because their climate is different, I do know that in the Southwest, in New Mexico and Arizona, the Hopis and the different pueblos, because it's so hot and dry, they put their corn on top of their adobe buildings, and it dries that way. But for the Haudenosaunee people, we make a braid. And most of the time we do our braiding like maybe the beginning of October, middle of October. And so at that time we have what we call a braiding party. And it's an old tradition that is still maintained in some of the communities. In the last few years, it's more people are getting back in touch with our mother, the earth, and returning to the old ways and part of our ceremonies, because there was a gap for a number of years. And I was trying to understand what was going on, because I used to ask some of the older people, because the old people always said, well, we plant it by the moon. So, but they didn't know what part of the moon. So I tried different things to find out. One time I was doing Blue Moon of Kentucky, and that didn't work out for me. Then I was using Bark at the Moon by Ozzy Osbourne. And you should see what my corn looked like. It was just like that. But that's fun. Anyways, but the thing is that there was a sad time in the history of a lot of our people. A lot of our grandparents and parents were taken away and put in these residential schools. And so, it's something that happened, and I don't want to dwell on it, but it explains why there are certain lapses of time where things were stopped. And so that was one of the biggest things that happened. And I know, like in Canada in the last couple of years, there's a lot of information coming out about some of the, I guess, the not so positive things that occurred with that. But nevertheless, we are living in the year 2022, and part of our ways and our culture has always been about sharing. And these are the things that I learned from my elders. And now I work as an elder in federal prison. I worked in federal prisons here in Canada for the last 16 years. And I teach and I work along with inmates, both native and non-native. And the purpose of it is to help them reconnect with themselves and reconnect by using gardens. And also, I'm an artist, so I also incorporate art, traditional arts, and I'm a sculptor. I carve in stone, and I also carve in wood. So I use these things and the tools and the teachings of my elders to assist them in part of their rehabilitation. And so in the last number of years, I've been invited to speak in many, many places. And I was really honored in 2017 to be part of an opening ceremony that was held in Montreal. My community is just outside the city of Montreal, just across the river. And we've been living here in this community since the 1600s. So we've been in the same spot a long, long time. And part of all these things, it's all about teaching. And one of the things that I always mention, because it's a cultural thing, our ways were always about sharing and trading, and that's how we've done things. And so when the Europeans came here, we did the same thing. We welcomed them, and we shared and we traded with them. That's our philosophy, because it's a teaching from our Creator, the Great Spirit, that it says we should have love in our heart for everybody. And it's been proven that all our forefathers had to do was turn around and walk in the forest, and there would have maybe been a different outcome. I read that about the people that landed at Plymouth Rock. They were helped by the Native Americans that were there. And here in Quebec, the same thing happened with Jacques Cartier's men, that he was helped by the Native nations that were here and gave them medicine and so on. So because that's part of our ways about sharing. And so this has always been our philosophy. And we still maintain that. And we talk about, in our language or in our culture, we talk about a symbol called 7 generations. So we're all responsible for the next 7 generations, and what we learn and what we teach and what we pass down, so that the life will continue. So in our language, you say, that which means the life will continue. So that's part of us as human beings, that we have this responsibility. As I learned from my father, my grandfather, my great grandfather, and now I'm a father and a grandfather and a great grandfather. And so all those generations and it's continuous. So as the cycles of life, the cycles of nature, so all these things, first of all, revolve around the food. And so there are many ceremonies. And as I said before, our ceremonial cycle begins in January with we call the midwinter ceremony. And at this time, marking the movement of the stars. So in the fall, this group of stars appears in the east, which is the Pleiades. And so that's the time that we harvest. And as the stars ascend across the sky, in mid-January, they usually wait on top of us directly in the north. And this is the time we commemorate what we call a midwinter. And this is about all renewals of all the different type of ceremonies that we do throughout the year. And also it's a ceremony that's dedicated to the reconnection of dreams. So dreams is very, very important in the Iroquois people and in their lives, and part of the direction. And so we do it then. And then as the stars move, then in the springtime, they're going to be in the west. And so that's the time we begin to plant again. And then they go on the other side of the world, and then they appear again in the fall in the east. So all of this is how we continue to follow the same group of stars for countless generations. And all our ceremonies are dedicated to ensure that the food crops grow. And in the beginning, in the springtime, there are ceremonies for the planting and for the seeds. And I guess maybe we call it like a lack of a better word, blessing the seeds. And this is a ceremony that it's led by the women, because the women are the ones that are connected. So in our culture, is our women, they're connected to our mother, the earth. The main food crops are female, corn, beans, and squash. They're the three sisters. I went to school with three sisters one time. There was Kathy, Donna, and I forget the other girl's name. Anyways, there's three sisters for you. Okay, so I like that. I like that one too. And so these ceremonies are led by the women. And when we begin, there's a song that they sing, and they say that this is the song of the Sky Woman, and it talks about that they're walking on the land, and as they're walking along, that the garden is growing. And they say that we still continue to do this song and dance for countless generations. So this is really important. This is a thing that's a part of our culture. And so now we'll talk about what happens in the different moon phases. So we'll get started. I know we're on the clock over here. Let me get this going here. So here we are. And then, so in the new moon, it's the new moon, we will never see the new moon. We'll always see the second day. And in our language, you just see a little sliver. It's called oscaziera. It's meaning this. It means like the sliver, like the claw of a hawk or an eagle. That's what you see. So what happens in this phase, everything that is green, okay? Everything that is green. So that means herbs, it means lettuce, it means cabbage. You can plant a lawn and all these things. And so today, those are things. And today, people are getting into what they call this cannabis, or they're saying there's marijuana. So I'm not really for that, but I'm not against that either, just to let you know. But because there are medical cannabis, and there's what do you call it, recreational cannabis. And people ask me, well, Silverbear, what kind do you grow? I just tell them industrial. So I got that from Cheech and Chong, by the way. They're my heroes. I like the way they talk. It's just a good, clean, little fun. So those are the things that happen. So everything that's greens, that's what you do in the new moon. And then the next part is the wax on. And so everything that has a seed inside of its fruit. So right here, guts it. Okay, this is the gourd. And then you'll hear the seeds inside of its fruit. So what has seeds inside of its fruit? So pumpkins, squash, tomatoes, peppers, sweet and chili, corn. Corn is also seeds inside of its fruit. So you see the corn is covered with a husk. So, and the seeds are inside of its fruit. Beans are all in a pod. So those are seeds inside of a fruit. So all those things are seeds inside of a fruit. are things that we grow in the half moon or the wax on. I like that. So that's what we plant. So the next part is the full moon. So in the full moon is everything that's roots, root crops. That's what you plant, and either by seed or by bulbs or tubers. And so what would you plant in the full moon? You would plant potatoes. So that's when I plant my potatoes in the full moon. And then what would you plant next? I would do onions if they're by bulbs. But if I start onions by seed, I start the seed in the new moon. So the seed is onion is one of those things where it's both a green and in a bulb. So there's that 2 times, and it's the same thing with a few things that I plant. It could be in both categories. All right. So corn at the same time is a grain and it's a green, and since the phases are side by side, you can start planting your corn in the new moon because it's a green or it's a grain. But then it's the ideal time to grow corn according to into the moon phases is 2 days before the full moon. And usually this is when this phase is in Scorpio, and corn loves to be planted at that time. So those are the things that we plant then. And so then you're going back again to the full moon. So the other thing at the full moon is the time of transplanting, because the moon has a gravitational pull on the earth, our mother the earth. And so even if you like, I like history, I read all kind of things. So during the Second World War, there was battles that were executed by the moon, because then the tides came up, and that really happened. And so there's the power of the moon, so it can raise the tides. And so this has gravitational pull on the earth. So everything that you transplant into the garden, that means everything that if you get it at a garden center or you started in at home, those go in there. Fruit trees, berries, all those things at that time. If you're going to do gladiolas, that's what you do. If you do dahlias in the garden or in the greenhouse, you do them all in the full moon. And then along with that, in addition to those things, it's also the time that you harvest. You harvest in the full moon everything that you have. So right now, it's still part of that that time to harvest your garlic. It's the full moon the other day, so it's perfect time, and this helps preserve and that. And also, it's related to canning. So when people can, I know, that sometimes people will put away tomatoes or pickles or different things, and sometimes they're spoiled. But if you begin to realize, some of this happened because it wasn't done like in the moon, and this is nobody's fault. We're all learning together. I'm learning as I'm going along. Over the years, at one time people thought, well, I just specialize in corn, and then I would speak at conferences, and as I would go around, I would have different type of themes to when I was making a presentation. So one year I had a presentation called "How to Keep a Raccoon Out of Your Garden." So one old lady got up, because this was in the Six Nations reservation. She got up later and explained to me how to keep raccoons out of your garden. So how you keep the raccoon out of your garden is you have to find some dead raccoons. Either they got bumped, or unless you did it in yourself. I don't know. I'm not making nobody's judgment here. And then they say that you burn them, and you take all those ashes of the raccoon and you sprinkle around your garden. And so, because the raccoon is a nose animal, he's going to smell the ground, and then when he finds that, he's going to think that's him being dead. So he's going to leave your garden. So that's one thing. And so the other thing is, a friend of mine that I met years ago through the Seed Savers. So I just want to go back to that, about my history and association with the Seed Savers Exchange. I used to work in New Hampshire in the early 1980s. And I used to I always bought a magazine called Organic Gardening. And in there, I saw an advertisement for Seed Savers and Kent Wheely. So I followed their instructions, and then I got a prescription and to the Seed Savers. And then in there was listings of people who had all kind of things that they had offer. And so, but one of the things that it said, well, you had to be a member in order to get certain things, and if you weren't, and that. But in a way, I felt, well, I'm always been a member because this is what I've done all my life. But nevertheless, so I went along with that. But I was very fortunate to meet some very, very, very good people over the years through the Seed Savers Exchange. I met a gentleman named Doug England, and he lived not too far from me in this area, maybe about 100 miles south, close to Malone, New York. So that would be the closest place that I could explain where he lived. So I met Doug one day. I went there and I hooked up with him, and we became friends. And then at one time he said to me, he says, Steve, he says, I know that you travel all throughout the Six Nations. You go to all the reservations at Onondaga and Tonawanda and Allegheny, Tuscarora, and that. He said, why don't you concentrate and focus on seeds of your own people? So I thought, well, that's a good idea. Why not? So, and since I think that's always been my nature to be like a people person, whenever I went to ceremonies, I always talked with the elders. And then when you would visit with the elders, because that's our way, they would say, oh, Steve, yeah. I remember some of them older guys, because a lot of our fathers and grandfathers were construction workers after Second World War. So all those big buildings in New York were built mostly by men from our community and the rest of the other Six Nations communities. The Empire State Building, my grandfather worked on the Empire State Building. My grandfather always worked on the Golden Gate Bridge, and my grandfather escaped from one of those residential schools, and he ended up going over there. And so that's part of our history. And so the Senecas, being out near closer to Buffalo, New York, and a lot of people worked in all those bridges and buildings on the East Coast from, everywhere. They knew one another, and and they would ask and this and that. But nevertheless, some of the old people say, well, hey, Steve, do you have this kind of bean where you come from? I said, no. So they turn around and they come back and they got a whole big bag of like a couple pounds of beans. And in the old days, I used to send a couple dollars to people who were listening to Seed Savers, and I got 3 beans. I said, wow. So that's okay too. But it reminds me of a friend that came to visit me a few years ago, and he said, oh, we met Steve, and after all that, he just gave us 3 beans. And he kind of felt, I don't know. But later he would go on to say, and which I told him, I says, if you can't make it with 3 beans, then it's not going to happen for you. And I've got 3 seeds at one time, a few times, and I increased it. So if you have this and in your mind, in your heart, and you put your mind to it, these things are possible. So I also, because I was working in New Hampshire, and through the Seed Savers, I met an older woman. Her name was Louise Bastable, and she grew some of her varieties at Gregory, J.H. Gregory. Some of you knew this gentleman. His catalogs in the late 1800s, and he's the gentleman that was responsible for introducing the Hubbard squash to the world. Gregory, and he also introduced the blue Hubbard squash. And at this time period, there was a lot of different squashes that were developed through Gregory and his work and people on his farms. So this lady, her name was Louise Bastable, and she gave me seeds of a marblehead squash. And actually, it was named after the area where she grew it on one of his farms in Marblehead, Massachusetts. And it's the parent of a blue Hubbard. A blue Hubbard and the green Hubbard came from the Marblehead squash. And so I grew it And I have those old books called Vegetables of New York. And there were 3 or 4 volumes, but the main 4 volumes, in which was always talked about in the seed savers, and also talked about in organic gardening. So and there's pictures in there in the cucurbits of New York. And so in there was a marblehead squash, and she gave me the seeds. So it grew very similar to the blue Hubbard, very similar to this. And as you see, if you looked at that, you could see where the resemblance. And so there was one person there. And at the same time, I continue reading organic gardening. And I got to know a gentleman named Tom Knotts, who was a gentleman who lived out in Ohio. And I went to go visit him. So because I have interest in squash, and I had interest in chili peppers and all these different things. And so to me, if you're going to really do it, and you have to go there. So that's what I did. So I took a plane and I went to Cleveland, Ohio. No, Columbus, Ohio. I had a friend who was living there. She was from my community. So I went, and she said, "Oh, I live right here." And I never knew that there was this great big pumpkin show down in Circleville, which was about 30 miles south of Columbus. And then what happened was, so I met Tom there, and I met a few other gentlemen. And at that time, they were looking for the biggest pumpkin in the world at this time, and they were looking for a 500-pound pumpkin. So the winner of the 500-pound pumpkin, his wife made a comment, because, when they were giving out this award, he said, "Well, my husband went out in the garden every night and kissed his pumpkin goodnight." And when I talked to him, he said, "Well, I gave 50 gallons of water every day to my pumpkin. So this is the secret. Tender, loving care. So kissing your pumpkin goodnight." I like that. And giving it plenty of water. And they won a trip somewhere, and I think at that time they won a $2,000 prize. So this was really nice to see all these different things. But it was through the organic gardening that I became aware of that. And through Seed Savers Exchange, I got to meet Tom. And so in those old days, and eventually I never met with Glenn Drowns, but I did communicate with him a lot in those years. And I have gotten several varieties from him at this time. So what I start to do, because there's been so many things that happen in First Nations communities that goes on, and there's always things that come along that occupy our people. And so I just start to offer seeds to people who are interested. So many of the first seeds that went into the Seed Savers Exchange from maybe the year 1982 to maybe 1988, it's ones that I shared with people. And then because the network is supposed to be that, then you reoffer it, and so on. And so this is how it's passed down. So I went out to Iowa a couple of years ago, and I met with Russ Crow, a very fine gentleman. And I also met with Ben Cohen, very fine gentleman. And it was a real nice time, and connect other people who have similar interests. And in our ways, we might explain it differently, but you have to have the spiritual connection in order, because the plants, like they say, well, you have to talk to your plants, you have to sing to your plants, and you evolve this way. And so I want to tell you a little story that so at one time I went to visit my friend Doug, and he had 3 corns planted at his garden. So he had this the white corn, which is full of flower, and then he had a flint corn planted, and then he had sweet corn. And where he lives, there's a hill there, and early in the evening, he saw a family of raccoons coming up the hill, and he said they went right by the sweet corn. He said they didn't even stop. He says, and they marched right back by the flint corn. And he said they went to go eat the Mohawk white corn. And so what we learned from that was that 4 out of 5 raccoons prefer our corn. Ain't that something? By golly, I'm telling you. So there you are. So that's why I had to get involved in how to keep a raccoon out of your garden. Because if those of you who grow corn know that raccoons are, can do a terrible job to your corn. So that's one story I want to share with you in regards to that. So many of the and then as I went along, people start to give different descriptions. And I remember there was an older woman at that time in the Seed Savers. I always kind of remember her name, Buzzwinger or Buzzwisers or something like that. It was so I always remember that name. And she offered a lot of different kind of squash. And then so I got seeds from her. But the next year when I planted them, there was 5, 6 different kind of looking squashes all on the vines from the same plant. So I didn't know. But at that time, the Seed Saver, their suggestion was taking glassine envelopes, which are those type of envelopes that stamps are usually collected in. And so they cover it. But what it would do is it would generate the heat and a moisture, and it would usually kill the plant. So I went through those things. So eventually I learned to use tape, but I was using tape where most of the time when I would take it off, I would break the blossom. So eventually I started to use painter's tape that we use when you're painting. And so that comes off fairly easy, and you can put it back together. But one of the things that's very important in my opinion is about in regards to the Seed Savers, and what it means is that we have to dedicate ourselves to these things because we're responsible to the future. And as you know, a lot of things just disappear. Some people don't grow a lot of the old-fashioned squash. And on my website, which is I call Steve's Garden Tips, and this is an idea I got from one of my elders. He always said, well, this is what our Creator made. He gave us these ceremonies. He gave us these songs. He gave us these plants that they all work dayan wago. It means it all comes together in your hand. And so we share that. And as we are here, for as long as we are here, that's part of our duties, and to maintain them. And if you see what's going on out there in the world with all things that are happening, so like this package of seeds, squash here, this is a nice variety. It's an old Iroquois variety, and I buy this, and I used to buy them every year. But what's been happening, companies put the patents on it, and they hybridize and then if you try to grow it the next year, it doesn't grow. So what happens is that we become like, what we're able to do and produce is actually by the direction of these seed corporations. So do we really have an independence from them, or do we have a independence that we could say it's because we have this that's passed down, or we kept it because my grandmother kept it, her grandmother kept it, and it doesn't matter where you are or what nation you come from. You're all here on our mother the earth, and we all have this to do. And as they are talking in the news here in Canada, and I imagine it's the same there in the United States, is that there are food shortages coming. And why? It's something to give thought about and to think about. So I'm not sure if we're beginning to run out of time. I want us to have a little sing along with I'm All Shook Up, but I think we're going to get ready in a few moments to take some questions. So one of the things I just want to share quickly is that in our language, everything is descriptive. So just like these beans that we call skunk beans, so in our language, it means onita, which is skunk. So when you look at it, what is the description of this bean? Well, it looks like a skunk. So that's why it's called that. And sometimes things are called by the way they look, or sometime in how we use it. and its purpose. So a lot of these things are still maintained today, first in our languages, and then it's translated into English. And then after that, it's about sharing with other people. So these are, so this is part what we call indigenous knowledge. The indigenous knowledge is knowledge of the land, or Hunzageka, our mother, the earth, that's been here since time immemorial. And in the year 2022, we're all struggling, but we're all struggling together, but we're all working together to try to preserve whatever we're able to do, even if it's just one thing that we can do. It's all very important. And I've been doing a lot of speaking for the last number of years, and I always encourage people to incorporate flowers, which attracts the pollinators. But as you look outside, there's getting to be fewer and fewer and fewer. I think I didn't see any monarch butterflies yet. Isn't that strange? In Canada, in Ontario, people are banned from cutting milkweed. So on one hand, they say, well, it's against the law to cut milkweed, but it's not against the law to use Roundup. Ain't that something? Okay. I just want to say that. I don't want to be political here about anything, but just to talk about this, to make a point. And so there's fewer and fewer bees. There's hardly any birds. So now when it rains, what happens? All kind of bugs and snails and that, and there's no birds. So what do? They go on their plants. And so what do most people do? They run into, get a bottle of Roundup and spray them all. And this to tell you how bad that is, some of you know, but now you walk into any tiny hardware store, and the first thing that's in the doorway is Roundup. Everywhere is Roundup. Ain't that something? You know? And all this is bad. You know? I live in an agricultural area, and you pass by these big, huge farms. One day you see beautiful green. The next day, it's all brown. And what happened? It got blasted with some type of Roundup or Agent Orange, a defoliant, Agent Orange. My uncle, who's just a few years older than me, was in Vietnam. He knows about Agent Orange. He was affected by that. Nevertheless, so the other workshops that I gave one time, I used to talk about, I used to call it the homicide of gardening. So how do you get homicide of gardening? Well, you get homicide of gardening by first use a chemical fertilizer, then you use a pesticide, then you use a herbicide, and on all those things are on the potatoes. Then at a certain number of days, you have to spray the potatoes to stop them from growing, because they can't grow through a mechanical process. They'll get all smashed up. So you have all that. And then when you see them on the shelves, what happens to a potato naturally? You leave it on the table for a couple of days, the warmth of the room and the light, the potato will begin to sprout. But in a grocery store that you see them, they're sprayed with an inhibitor. So all these things are absorbed into the potato. And then you get the homicide of gardening. That's how I interpret it. But this is just my own personal view. People have different opinions, and that's okay. So I think we're coming out to the time about asking some questions. So I am not sure if before it closes and all that, I thank you for the opportunity to share some of the knowledge that I have with you, and it was really nice. And maybe in the future we'll be able to come all together down there in Iowa, and the home of Captain Kirk. I love it. I'll go back again, and so I think you're supposed to live long and prosper.
That's great. Thank you, Stephen. You said you wanted to do a sing-along. Do you want to do that before Q&A or Q&A first?
Well, my guitar's got no strings on it, so I can't sing any Elvis for you. because he's all shook up right now. Okay.
Okay.
So we'll have question and answers.
We'll do
work out.
questions first then.
Yes, we will.
You mentioned a garden, Steve's Garden Tips website. How do we find that website?
Well, actually, it's on a Facebook page.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'll find that. I'll find that and put that in the chat. Could you explain to those of us who are not as familiar with the moon cycles what it means to say the waxing and waning and half moon, full moon, what those terms mean?
Mm-hmm. So the new moon is the first phase, waxing, wax on. So you just have to remember, I gave some workshops where I had a picture of Mr. Miyagi saying wax on, wax off, and sand the floor. So somebody started laughing, but he said, when you think about it, he says, that's a way to remember things. So a friend of mine said, Steve, when you want to talk, he says, have some visuals, sing a couple songs, get the people's attention and keep them engaged. So I try to do that the best that I can. And so one of the things is that, and it's fun because you got to make it fun too at the same time. Because if you ever went to a lecture where somebody's really boring, you listen for 2 minutes and that's about it. But you have to, and so this is what you have to do. So you incorporate all these things, you do a little bit of Elvis, maybe some of the Four Tops. I like to do that sometime too, and then anything that's Motown. And so you put that all together because in the garden, you sing, you play music, and it's proven. I did read an article because a lot of friends send me things. So a friend sent to me one time that there's a study done and they found out that corn loves to listen to Mozart. So ain't that something? Dum 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 dum. Mozart. But before I used to put my radio and I would have Black Sabbath in the garden and everything else. And it sounds funny, but when I finished speaking one time at one conference, a Mayan Indian got up and he started speaking after me. Was from Guatemala, and he laughed, but he said, "No," he says, the music, the sound, it's very important because this what transcends something physical to something spiritual. So in our ways, in ways of First Nations people, we talked about that. The comment was that with all the technology that the scientists and everybody has, how come they can't create corn? They said it was developed by grass and so on. So the gentleman, the Mayan Indian, he said, because he says there's a third part that they're leaving out. He says, and they're leaving out the spirituality. So I think once you understand that and put it into part of your, part of you, so that it becomes this natural with song and dance and prayer and all these things, that's part of the natural cycle of planting in the garden and followed by the moon. So we have songs for the moon, we have songs for the sun, we have ceremonies for the thunders, so that everything it talks about keeping balance and the equilibrium. And so one of my elders, my teacher, I call him, he told me one day, he says, Steve, he says, you got two hands. He said, put one behind your back. So I did. So he says, pretend you're going to hammer a nail. So I was going like that. So he said, what do you feel? I said, I feel out of balance. So he said, that's it. He says, everything is created in a balance. So you have to understand that. And once you can apply this knowledge to everything that you're doing. So in our ways, it talks about energies. There's a positive energy and a negative energy. So sometime when something is like a person is really good, but then all of a sudden it can go to their, what do you say, go to their head. So that's why then that type of attitude becomes negative. So you have to learn to work in a balance. And with the garden, we have to learn to work in a balance. At one time, here in Canada, where we are, and they still do that, they still follow, they plant on the Queen's birthday, which is like the 21st of May. and I don't know why, and they plant everything. And that's the way it was when I was younger. I waited to plant all at that time. And you know, later I learned that there's things that could be planted even a month before, things that like cooler weather, things that need to have warmer weather, and all that. And all this time, I never knew that we were following Freddie Mercury's birthday. So that's something that I learned.
I have a couple of people asking to be reminded if we plant anything during the waning moon.
Nothing at all. It's called The Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. You don't plant anything. That's the time you have to give the ground a rest, but it's time to hoe, time to pull weeds all the time. That's the phase that you do at that time. It's only 7 days, and a lot of things could happen in that time. My nephew one time told me that, he says, I found at that time of the year, he says, I was pulling weeds out of the ground. He says, it just came out like that. He says, I was pulling weeds at a different moon phase one time, and I noticed that I was struggling to take the weeds out. Hutchly, what do you think about that?
I believe it. I have someone saying that they grew glass gem corn last year and really loved it. And this is a question about the name. People have, or not the name gem corn, sorry, but people have asked about the phrase Indian corn and wondering how you feel about that phrase and if you have thoughts on whether that is respectful language.
Well, it is, because first of all corn is Indian. It came from Indian people. The glass gem corn was developed by Carl Barnes. I never met him in person, but through the Seed Savers Exchange, I used to correspond with him in the early 1980s, and I sent him some corn of my nations to him, and that became part of his collection. I don't know if he ever used it, any things that he was doing, but he was a gentleman that I met through the Seed Savers, and had very similar interests. And it's a thing that he worked and he developed. And there was also another gentleman, I believe his name was Ernest Stubbles or Stubble or something like that. And he worked with different types of corns, and he had a beautiful kind of, what do you call that corn there? Dent corns. And so there's nothing wrong with calling Indian. It's okay with me,
Great, thank you. Do you teach young people in your community about growing food?
Yes, I do. I've been involved in different workshops. I'm usually asked now and then to come to the schools, make presentations. Now I've been doing the last several years presentations with the teachers. I've been doing radio programs in my community pretty much every week, mostly last year and the few years before that. And I've been doing Zooms in the last 2 years out of my community, every week, everything about the gardens and so on.
Great, thank you. And have you sent seeds to various seed banks around the world, or been involved in that kind of work?
Not really. I don't really believe in that too much. And the reason for that is that I don't mind to share seeds with people who have the interest, but as far as the seed bank and that, sometimes somebody's, the people like to put ownership on it, and some of my elders don't really kind of like that idea. So I have to also work along with my Indigenous elders through all the Native communities and about their feelings. So we have to be respectful for that. But one of the things that is true is that if you take the corn here and freeze it, and 50 years from now or whatever, the world is going to be different. So if you plant it every year or every other year, the corn acquires the genetic memory of what's happening at that moment. So 50 years from now, nobody's going to know what the world's going to be like, and who knows if those seeds at that time will be able to re-establish itself in that time period. So that's my own personal feeling why I'm not really in favor of that in my own personal way. I'm not against whatever people try to do something, because as I said in the beginning, we all have that responsibility. So if people feel that's what has to be, so so be it. But for us, we've always grown the corn, we've always grown beans or pumpkins and all these different type of fruits and vegetables for countless generations. And see, corn came from the south. And so what happens where we live here is the most northern part of where the corn growing it stops, because you can't grow corn further north than where we are. Because if you go north from where I am to Hudson Bay, well, in the summer, they have like 22 hours of daylight. If you go further north where the Inuit lives, it's 24 hours of daylight. So corn and plants are daylight sensitive. And even though in the last number of years, the weather's been changing for various reasons, but what's been happening, the fall has been getting longer. Sometimes we don't even have frost. We didn't have no frost until December, and the weather was nice. But the thing is, the corn grows within a certain length of time, and after that, it begins to, to dry back. So even though we get a longer fall, it's not going to happen. The corn, as it migrated with the native people over a millennium, adapted to the area that they live. So when we came from the south, in our oral traditions, it talks about our people coming from the south, and as they came up the rivers, they built villages and they stayed there for a number of years. Then they moved the village again, so many miles or whatever, and then they planted again. And as they kept on coming north, the varieties adapted to the length of the day at that time. And our peoples that grow these things, or this is about as far north as that you can grow some of those things naturally. Okay, today we can do a greenhouse and we do all that, but that's different from that time period.
Thank you. I have a clarifying question being asked about the waning moon. When do the 7 days of not planting during the waning moon start?
Okay, so you go from the full moon and you count 7 days from the full moon, and then that's the waning moon.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of love coming through the chat here. Thanking you for your knowledge and your stories and this inspiring talk. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with before we go?
Well, I just want to say thank you very much, and Elvis has left the building.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here.
Okay.
Thank you again, Stephen. It was a pleasure to hear from you, and thank you all for being here.
Yahweh means thank you in my language.